Now that we've finished defining the backend mutation to update the books, we're going to create a form and update the state from the front end, and then we're going to see how Urql is going to manage our state for us and update the UI automatically without us having to do anything manually. And this is one of the main selling points of GraphQL. The GraphQL client, in our case Urql, is going to manage all the state mutation for us, and it's going to avoid a lot of common problems you have with things like Vuex or Redux where you have to update the state manually. Let's go ahead and create a very simple form and then see how mutations work with Urql. So the first thing we're going to do is create a form in here. I'm going to use a submit event and we're going to prevent the default, and we're just going to call a function called submit. Inside of here, let's go ahead and define a very simple label, and this is going to be for our title. We're going to go ahead and say title inside of here, and then we're just going to have a simple input to define this one as well. And we're going to bind using vModel, and we're just going to bind to a ref called title. Now that we have that, let's go ahead and define those two. We're going to have our submit event, and we're also going to have a const title, which is going to be equal to a ref, and that's just going to be an empty string by default. Finally, I'm going to import this from the top level view, and this is going to get rid of all our errors. Just to make sure we did everything correctly, I'm going to head over to app, and we're just going to render our form. So let's go ahead and render our create form above our show book component. If I save this one off and head back to my browser, we can see the form is now being rendered correctly. The next thing we need to do is define our mutation, so let's go ahead and do that. The first thing we need to do is import a few things from Urql. We're going to go ahead and this time grab them both from view Urql. We're going to grab GraphQL just to define our mutation, and we're going to grab the use mutation composable as well. The first thing I'm going to do is define my mutation, and I'm going to call this one create book. It has the same name as my component. In this case, we're going to use the GraphQL tag again, and we're going to have a new mutation here called create book. It's going to be very similar to the one I have in GraphQL from earlier, so I'm just going to go ahead and copy paste that one over. Let's go ahead and grab our mutation and copy and paste it over here. The next thing I'm going to do is add a variable. At the moment, the title is currently hard-coded, and I don't want this to be hard-coded. I'd like this title to be whatever the user types into the form, and we can pass arguments like this. It's going to be a title, which is going to be a string type that is required. Now, instead of hard coding this, I'm just going to pass in my title variable, and we can tell it as a variable by the dollar symbol. You can see we have no type completion here and no type safety, and that is the problem we're going to be solving in just a moment using GraphQL Nexus. Anyway, the next thing we need to do is create a variable to hold a reference to our mutation. So we're going to say use mutation and pass in our mutation, which is going to be create book. Unlike useQuery, this is not going to execute automatically. We have to call createBook.executeMutation to run this mutation. And we're going to do that down here inside of our submit function. We're going to say execute mutation and pass in an object of our arguments. In this case, we're going to have title. This is going to map out to this title here. And we're just going to say title.value. It is going to be the value of that inside of our form. We do need to use value here, of course, because this is a ref. And to get the value, we have to say .value. Finally, if we did everything correctly, we're actually going to see the true power of GraphQL and Urql here. We're not only going to update our backend state by creating this mutation, it's also automatically going to come over here and update the list of books as well. And we haven't done anything manually, it's going to do this automatically, and I'll explain exactly how this works once we make sure it's actually working correctly. So let's go ahead and give this one a try. If I head back to my browser now, head back to my application and create a new book, I'm going to say my new title and submit this one, and we can see this actually updated automatically. And when I first saw this, I was kind of surprised and a little bit unnerved. It feels like complete magic, and that's because it is, but like all good magic, there is good reasons how this works under the hood, and let's take a quick look at that right now. So you can see we have 3 requests over here. Just to show you exactly what's happening, when I refresh the page, I have 1 request, and this is going to be that query for the show books list. It's going to go ahead and grab both of our books, and we also have this type name book, which is going to become important. Let's go ahead and create a new book here. Let's say another one, and if we go ahead and submit this, we're actually going to see 2 requests. The first is going to be our mutation. We can see our new book here, and we also see the type name is going to be a book. Finally, we then have a 3rd request, which is going to be the same as the first one. It's going to be refetching the list of books. What Urql is doing is actually invalidating this query and updating it again because it's detected we made a mutation that operates on the same type name of book. If you'd like more information on the nitty-gritty details of how this works, you can come over to their website and go to this document caching page and read about it here. Basically what it's doing is we have a query here and it identifies them by the type name. If it realizes you're making a mutation that updates the book, in this case the same type name, it's going to re-execute and invalidate all the queries containing the type of book. So you can imagine if you have a very large complex website with many similar entities, we're going to be executing a lot of queries. There is many ways to alleviate this potential problem, and that's using something called a request policy. You can opt to use a local cache, or then you can make a network request if you think you really need to. Again, this is a very big topic we may talk about later on, but for now that's the general idea of how Urql works. And the real benefit here is we don't have to manage the state by ourselves anymore. It's managed by a normalized cache automatically. So we don't need to use something like Vuex and think about how we're going to structure it. All we're doing is telling us what's changed, and Urql is going to figure out what needs to be updated and do it automatically, which is pretty nice. It definitely reduces the burden of state management and makes it a little bit more automated. Again, we do have a few problems here. One is the great lack of type safety. We have this title up here, which is a string, but there's no type safety here. And we have no idea what kind of arguments we need to pass down here. And this can become very problematic when you have very large complex input types. And that is the problem GraphQL Nexus is going to solve. At this point, our application is actually feature complete. Everything is working as I expected. The next couple of lectures are going to focus on doing a very significant refactor, and the goal is going to be having complete type safety. What this means is we're going to have a single source of types, so instead of duplicating the types over here inside of the schema, and then redeclaring them down here inside of the context, and then redeclaring them again over here inside of our front end, we're going to have a single source, and they're all going to be completely type safe. We're going to get recommendations when we type them out, and we're going to get errors if we provide the wrong arguments. So let's go ahead and jump into GraphQL Nexus and see how we can start getting this to be a bit more type safe.